All right, hello everyone. All right, I'm going to ask a question to start off with. Hey, Matt. Hey, I'm glad you're here, actually. All right. Now, I want you to be honest. This won't be a reflection on you. This will be a reflection on us in the DNS community as to how well this got communicated to you. How many of you, by raise of hands, is this the first time you've ever heard of DNS Flag Day? Okay. More than I expected, but okay. All right. All right. How many of you actually know that, well, those that raise your hands won't know, but how many of you that didn't raise your hands, do you know what day is DNS Flag Day? Excellent. Okay. It turns out DNS Flag Day has already passed. All right. So it turns out the name DNS Flag Day gets, or Flag Day in general, gets some people excited. Okay. I'll talk about this a little bit more later on. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, I'm Eddie Winstead. I'm from ISC. Blah, blah, blah. All right. So all of you in this room know that if the DNS doesn't work, the network is still working just fine. Right? Mostly. The DNS is for us stupid humans. We remember letters easier than numbers. Okay? So most DNS transactions or transactions on the internet start with the DNS, and so here's sort of a very simplistic view of how that works. Yeah. So here on the left side we have a resolver. That's the one that takes in questions from clients. All right, now I have a question for all you DNS geeks in here. How many of you, without looking right now, know what name server you're using to send your queries to? Okay, very good. Yeah, the usual characters. Okay. All right, it starts at 2620 or something like that. Yeah, anyway. All right, so you as the client are sending queries into these resolvers. That resolver then acts on your behalf and goes off and asks the questions that are required to be asked of many levels of authoritative servers, usually, to get the answer back to you. Okay. So that's very simplistic. Usually there are many of these resolvers. There are usually at least 13 of those authoritative servers somewhere. Anyway. And then also, along with the question and the answer coming back, there are lots of flags involved that are being used. I also want to point out that the very basics of this design are 35 years old. So kudos to the DNS for still operating as it does. All right, excellent. Now, the things that come back, one of the important things that come back from the authoritative servers are these response codes. So these are used to give clues to the resolver side of things as to what might have gone wrong if you don't get the answer that you expect. Okay. Some of these, if you do DNS, you're very familiar with. Favorites are like NX domain. Serve fail is usually everyone's favorite. At ISC, we have two license plates. There's a serve fail license plate, and I have an NX domain license plate, if that tells you anything. And then bad vers is one that we're going to talk about in terms of this talk today. So remember I said like it's been 35 years, and so of course over this period of time between 1983 and now, there are things that we wanted to add, functionality that we needed to add to the DNS. This was done via something called extension mechanisms for DNS, or EDNS 0. This was originally defined in 1999, so this is coming up on 20 years old. When we talk about DNS Flag Day, this is mostly what we're talking about here is making sure that on the authoritative side of things, that people respond properly to EDNS queries coming in or EDNS flag queries coming in from the resolvers. Okay, so you know when the whole Flag Day thing sort of got out to people beyond the DNS community, there was a lot of freak out in terms of a lot of stuff is going to break. How are you guys going to turn all this stuff off sort of on the fly and break things? All right. Is everyone's DNS still working? Yeah, okay, good. As well as always, exactly. As far as we know, it's working. Now, the thing about EDNS 0 is in 1999, of course, we couldn't, it's sort of ironic, we couldn't just do a flag day, right, and say, okay, at this juncture, we're going to cut off regular old plain great DNS, and we're going to implement something new. EDNS 0 was designed to be a hop-by-hop extension. So there are flags that can be sent along from querying clients, from resolvers, that say, I can speak EDNS 0, and I can do some things, can you as well? And then the authoritative servers can respond back, and they can agree on how they're going to speak about things. Now, it turns out that over the years, 20-some years, or close to 20 years, there were a lot of authoritative servers that were sending back confusing responses. Sometimes they weren't sending back anything to EDNS queries. So what ended up happening is, though this was designed to be an add-on to the DNS and easy to deploy, what ended up happening was the folks that write DNS software for the resolvers had to do a lot of workarounds for these authoritative servers that would not properly implement EDNS 0. Okay? The EDNS standard was updated about 5 years ago. It turns out one of the authors is here. Hello, Jao. So if you have any questions about EDNS itself, you have the authority here. But in essence, it was outlined in the standards. If you don't speak EDNS, or I ask you about an EDNS version that you don't support, then just respond to me with bad vers in the response code, and we'll go on just fine. If I send you an EDNS flag and you don't speak EDNS, that's fine, just ignore it. Same thing with EDNS options. Okay? The other thing I want to point out here is that it wasn't only authoritative servers that were causing problems. It turns out that a lot of people put firewalls in front of authoritative servers. That's entirely fine. But if you do that, you need to make sure that firewall knows how to, or has properly implemented DNS protocols. The old joke is it's always the firewall, right? All right. Well, what do we do? Why do we have EDNS now, and what do we use it for? The original design was you could do UDP DNS messages up to 512 bytes. Anything over 512 bytes, TC bit would get set, and you need to retry me over TCP to get the rest of the data, generally speaking. These days, via EDNS, we can speak UDP between ourselves up to 4096 bytes. Okay, so that's great. One of the main drivers of that was the implementation of DNSSEC. Now, I do want to point out one of the things that we've discovered over the last few weeks is there was a misconception that if I don't do DNSSEC, then it doesn't matter whether or not I speak EDNS. Okay, I won't be affected by this. It turns out, since Bind 9.11, we've started implementing DNS cookies turned on by default. So DNS cookies are a way for us to prevent or mitigate spoofing and DDoS attacks in the DNS. Okay? So even if you didn't do DNSSEC, you would certainly be affected by DNS cookie implementation. There's also a client subnet identifier. This is a way of sending more specific information, usually by geographic location. There's some data about the client asking the question that we can use on the authoritative side to send data back. And then the next great things for the DNS are probably going to come from EDNS. So we just felt like, the DNS community just felt like 2019 was a good time to go ahead and declare a flag day and say, you have to respond appropriately to these EDNS queries. All right. So here's some data. So we at ISC ran this ednscomp.isc.org, and we still have it. Our operations crew is here. Dan has blue hair today, I think, bluish green. Okay, so I want you to test your domains if you like, and if Dan stands up, just stop. That'd be great. This infrastructure was not designed to be massively queried. So starting about 2 weeks before Flag Day, we got many calls from organizations saying, hey, I serve 1 million domains or 2 million domains, and your EDNS compliance machine keeps rate limiting me. Well, of course, okay. So the tools that we made available on EDNS Comp, the website, are freely downloadable, and you can build the test yourself. If you have a massive environment that you need to test, download the tools directly from our GitLab site. Don't try to do it through this thing. But what I want to point out is, like a lot of you raised your hand that you hadn't heard of DNS Flag Day. And so we at ISC have been tracking this compatibility thing since late 2014, I believe. So a very long time. So for us, it's sort of old hat, right? It's like, of course everyone knows about this. I've given some talks at some conferences about, the title was called EDNS Incompatibility. I don't think I hit NANOG, and so for that I do apologize. But we've been doing this for a long time. As you can see, things are trending in the right direction and have been for quite a while. Because before we even declared Flag Day, you know, a lot of you know our good buddy Mark Andrews. You've exchanged email with him on the NANOG list. He has been working on this. This has really been his passion. So in all these years that you see here, he was contacting firewall vendors, other people who weren't doing the right thing with the DNS protocol. Okay? But at some point we figured, you know, we just have to declare Flag Day and move on. So these are some of the things that we noticed. Obviously, firewalls can get in the way. Load balancers can do some odd things. And then older, Microsoft didn't originally implement the EDNS in their name server software. So when I say older Microsoft servers, I'm talking about servers older than 10 years old. Okay? So I think, I mean, I don't know the Microsoft stuff, but I think around 2008 servers when they finally started doing the right thing. Okay? So we're still talking about a decade worth of, hopefully you upgraded in that time. One of the issues that we have, or DNS software vendors have, is how do we interpret these timeouts? So I said, you know, I mentioned that firewalls are blocking EDNS or responding with, you know, inappropriate language. They're responding with things that don't match the standards. Now, one of these that's really tricky is when we send EDNS information and we don't get any response at all. This is the one that's been very tricky on, again, for DNS software vendors. We had to write code and maintain code to try to work around these authoritative name servers and firewalls. So essentially, you know, in the old DNS, if I didn't get a response from a DNS server, then it pretty much meant there's no need trying again because that server's down or something's wrong, so I can try something else. When we talk about implementation of EDNS, this wasn't the case. There were servers that would answer regular DNS but not EDNS, or would give, again, conflicting or confusing responses. And so we had to write a bunch of workarounds to handle these cases. Yeah, so the workarounds that we implemented were we retry without EDNS. We'd even retry with TCP. And the main thing we would do is as we're talking to that server, we would just disable EDNS all around. Again, so now when we're moving into wanting to implement things like DNS cookies, you know, not even talking about DNSSEC, this creates problems. So we need those authoritative servers to answer appropriately. As you might imagine, having to write that extra code makes the code even more brittle than it already is. So it's a lot to keep up with, trying to handle these workarounds and these dependencies. So they also make it much harder for us to implement new features. Again, if folks aren't doing EDNS, then it makes it harder for us to do things like DNS cookies. You might expect that if I am a resolver and I have to keep retrying an authoritative server over various mechanisms, then it's going to slow down the DNS for all of us. Okay. The other thing in terms of coming to 2019 is the majority of things had been fixed. So we didn't feel like this was going to be a major disrupting thing on the internet if we declared this day. It turns out it did not, I hope. Who in here had a DNS problem related to DNS Flag Day? Okay, very good. That'll help us in the question and answer period, I assume. I have had someone come up to me in the lobby yesterday, actually, and said, hey, thanks for doing that flag day because you got X ISP to finally fix their name servers. So I could snip out my workaround config that I had for them because now their name servers behave properly. So there's some good news. So again, the date was February 1st. To me, this is a really impressive group of entities that came together to do this. We're really proud to be part of this group and very excited that this group got together to do this. So on the software side of things, the open source vendors that you see there, ISC being one of them, our friends at NLNet Labs, CZNIC, and Power DNS, and then on the services side, the Google DNS, the Quad9, the Cloudflare DNS, resolvers started implementing this as well. Okay, so I said the name Flag Day was a little bit of not exactly the right term. Okay, what it meant was after that date, for example, ISC, we're not going to release another version of Bind that has these workarounds in it after that date. So for us, Bind 9.13.6 and 9.14 no longer contain these workarounds that we're talking about. All right. Power DNS is 4.2. It turns out they were pretty, since they're one of the newer ones, they never implemented these workarounds. So for them, it wasn't as big of an issue. And then for Unbound, it's either 184 or 190. All right. Now, there's a lot of, we're the open source folks. There are a lot, of course, vendors that either use our products or our software in their products or have their own DNS software. If you download the slides, these links should be clickable. If your vendor is here, you should see a statement from them. If they're not here, you should be able to ask them, and hopefully they will know about DNS Flag Day. I suspect they will. And then again, the service operators, as you see listed here. Google, I know, started pretty much on February 1st rolling out these changes to 8.8.8.8. And I don't know where they are now, but I know the initial rollout on February 1st, they didn't see any issues, and so they've continued the rollout since then. So this is the part that gets Dan nervous, but you can test your domains at this site, dnsflagday.net. Note that that site is not hosted by ISC, but the backend, the EDNS comp test is the part that we run. The front end to this is a little more stripped down. If you want the real hardcore responses, go to ednscomp.isc.org. So in this case, we have, and I'm trying to do my best about not naming and shaming anyone in this talk. But here we have our good buddies at RIPE. So of course, these slides were made at least in early January. So there's been some changes since I made these, but RIPE is doing great, of course. These folks at techradar.com, they were like one of the worst offenders in terms of what we saw in the test. It turns out I checked these last week, and they are now completely fine and compliant. So they're all systems go and green. Wally.com is one that's interesting because if you look at the actual output of the tests, they just have one name server that looks to be having a problem, and it looks to be having a network problem. So all their other name servers are answering fine. They're fully compliant with EDNS. There's no problems. They have one that's having a problem. So the reason we have this slide on here is just to let you know there could be other issues other than this DNS Flag Day thing that could cause something to complain at you on this. Okay? Yeah. So our good buddies at Netflix, you will note that even if you run their tests today, there are quote-unquote minor problems detected. It is after February 1st. Who else has streamed to Netflix while they've been here in the hotel? Okay, it's worked fine. I watched Parks and Rec. It was great. No problems. DNS is great. What this really is that whole thing. Remember I said earlier that there are certain, Netflix has their domains hosted at a certain provider. And that provider is currently, they're responding just fine to EDNS 1 queries, except they're not responding with the bad vers response code. So that's technically a violation, and that's why you see the warning here. Most of my career has been in operations, so I certainly understand there's a strong debate about whether or not I should be told to respond to something that has not been defined yet. So EDNS 1 has not been defined yet, but part of that reason is when it was redone 5 years ago, we may have wanted to bump the EDNS version, but it would have broken so many things we couldn't. So at some point in the future, we're going to want to bump the version, so we're trying to get people prepared for that as well. All right, so when you do the testing, you'll get a summary. Yeah, if you get something other than a timeout, you probably need to upgrade or talk to your DNS vendor. Yeah, if you're getting timeouts and the machine is actually up, you probably want to take a look at your firewall settings. All right, so the whole point of this Flag Day thing is, the long-term goal here is, again, we get to remove a bunch of that workaround code, so we're trying to make the DNS more resilient. The DNS will be faster. We'll get to more easily deploy the next greatest DNS features. The one, again, that we are excited about is DNS cookies these days. All right, does anybody watch the show Fun with Flags? Okay, excellent. Matt, this slide actually was made for you, so you're welcome. All right, so somehow along the way on the NANOG list, there got to be some conversation about how could you guys be so silly to do this on this time. So we learned some things, and when I say I made this slide, so I'm only speaking for probably the ISC side of things. Obviously, there's a bunch of us in the DNS community that came together to decide on this date. I can almost guarantee you none of those people watched the Super Bowl or ever were even aware that such a thing existed. Okay, so we weren't trying to make your life painful. Whenever you pick a date like this, it's always weird, right? You can't do November, December. You want to avoid the summer months because that's vacation, blah, blah, blah. And actually, most of the ISC employees today are not based in the US. So most of them, I would argue, are not Super Bowl aware. So anyway. The beware the echo chamber thing, this is what I was asking about the sort of the failure of the DNS community to get this communicated. To us, this was all like, we've been talking about this for 20 years. We've been talking about trying to get people to fix their stuff hardcore for like the past 5 years. So, and again, we've reached out to firewall vendors. We've reached out to other DNS software vendors. And so we didn't think this would be such a big deal. It turns out that some news organizations got a hold of this. Apparently some auditor got a hold of this. And then all of a sudden, sort of about 2 weeks before the Flag Day, ISC's phones were ringing quite a bit. Which is kind of amazing. Most people contact us via email. What I really want to say here too is, I'd like to see more of the DNS operations people show up to DNS OARC. All right, it's going to be co-located with the NANOG in Austin at the end of in October. So that voice, that's who we heard a lot from, was people who provide authoritative DNS services, and then the ISP on the resolver side, we heard from a lot of them as well, and they were sort of caught unawares about this. So if you want to help us fix that, please do attend OARC because you'll have direct interface with all the people that develop the DNS RFCs and write a lot of the DNS code. Okay. All right. So I have to say, during that 2 weeks before Flag Day period, I said several times that the naming of this is unfortunate. Because people were calling and asking me to see if I could tell if things like tiny DNS were going to still work after February 1st. Those 2 weeks were a lot of work for a lot of us at ISC. But it turns out, in retrospect, I actually think the name was good because we saw a lot of movement right before the flag day, as these graphs will show. So a lot of folks coming into compliance right before the deadline, which if you're like me, I'm sort of a right before the deadline kind of person, so I totally understand. I don't know, if we do this again, I will go ahead and warn you that there is some courage amongst the DNS folks that this has gone so well. So you might see us do something else along these lines. I don't know what that is. We don't have something that needs to be implemented by some certain time, but you may see us try to do something like this again. So again, come to OART, be more engaged with the DNS community, and hopefully we can avoid some of the last minute freak out that we did this time around. So yeah, check your domains. I suspect everyone's working just fine these days. If you do get the warnings, go to the EDNS comp site, see what they are. Might not be things for you that you have to worry about right now. The other thing is some of this stuff is if we do see problems, it's going to be kind of tricky to debug, right? Because some name servers are answering correctly, some are not. Those are usually the most fun problems to debug. So keep this talk in mind. Keep DNS Flag Day in mind. If you see a DNS issue, it may or may not be related to that. Okay? And for that, I will be happy to address any questions.
Matt Petak here. Eddie, thank you very much for the
Matt.
talk on this. And also, thank you for dealing with the last-minute freak out on the mailing list there.
Yes.
I will agree, terming it the Flag Day really did raise a lot of the, oh my God, the sky is going to fall type reactions,
Yes.
especially on what is arguably a US-centric big weekend for advertisers. I do think that the output on the tool, there were a couple of our domains that I had tested that showed up big screens of red output, which led to a, oh my God, how bad a shape are we in? And some of the follow-up emails on, actually don't panic, that's kind of okay. I think the tool could have been better about, if you see red, it may not actually all be bad, even though red for a lot of people is the red blinking, you're screwed now type of warning.
Yeah.
But kudos on it going well. I had a lot of other things to worry about that weekend, but DNS turned out to not be one of them. Good job.
Excellent. Glad to hear that. And thank you for the feedback. We've certainly gotten similar feedback that some of the responses were a little alarmist when they didn't have to be. So, yep, totally understand. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much.